Before we begin, thank you very much to another evil descendant from the future for joining the Patreon campaign. Another one? Are all of my descendants going to turn out to be evil? You know, given the fact that I made a career out of making fun of Transformers, I think that's fair. I think that's fair, honestly, if we're really being fair about this. But thank you very much for the support. Thank you for joining the Patreon campaign. Hope you enjoy your stay here. Thank you to everyone who keeps this channel afloat and to keep the whole thing going, because you guys are the reason I can continue. So thank you very, very much. Okay, it's Spooky Month. And for Spooky Month, I didn't want to just do something for Halloween. I wanted to hit a few kind of like seasonal topics along the way. And one of the things that occurred to me is, of course, the horror genre, specifically for video games. Transformers does not have a great record when it comes to the video game department. And we're in an era where everything kind of branches out and does, whatever. My Hero Academia has, a battle royale now. Dragon Ball has a asymmetrical survival game. Things like that are a thing now, but Transformers just kind of has trouble getting video games off the ground in general, so we don't really get the chance to branch out. But what if we did? What if we did? So let's take a few popular horror genres, we'll take a few different styles of horror game, and let's just see how it would work if we tried to adapt it to Transformers. And where we start is probably the most well-known horror video game out right now, which is Five Nights at Freddy's. I wouldn't call this a horror game. I would call this a jump scare simulator. I would call this a startling engine. It doesn't feel like real suspense. Like you sit there and you just dread the jump scare. And if you're kind of immune to it and just kind of like know what's going to happen, it's not really scary anymore. Like for some people that builds atmosphere. For me, it's just like, no, it's like, it's not the atmosphere doing the work. I'm just like scared of the jump scare. It's like watching a balloon that's being inflated, and you're just like in the back of your head terrified of when it's going to pop. It's something like that. So it's not my type of horror game, but it is super popular. There's tons of knockoffs now. It's getting a movie. So it is something we have to acknowledge in this. The format seems pretty simple to me. You are some Cybertronian, some Autobot, tasked with trying to keep the Ark safe from Decepticon invasion overnight while everyone else tries to recharge. This is a pretty adaptable thing, to the point where I'm kind of surprised no one even attempted this. For all the knockoffs there are of this out there, this seems like it would have been a pretty easy one to do. This seems like, yeah, it just kind of fits. If we want to fit this more to the theme, I suggest instead of animatronics, you go with Insecticons. They just seem right for the role, especially if you work in extra clones, if you work in things like the deluxe Insecticons. Imagine Five Nights at Freddy's, and your warning signs throughout that entire game is little metallic clacks of like the points of metal insect legs against the ground, or little skitters. There's like little skitters and chirps, like things that would like normally unsettle you if you weren't expecting them. And this is in droves all around you. Surround sound in your headphones. Okay, maybe there are some environmental things. Maybe there is a bit of atmosphere to Five Nights. But this feels like that would be the way to adapt it. Keep in mind, I'm just pitching ideas based on, big horror games or popular horror games. I'm not going to go like too original here. We're just kind of having fun and seeing how Transformers can actually work if they were done in these styles. Another game I was reminded of recently, Poppy Playtime. And this one seems to have a little bit more of a fixed place in Transformers if you adapted it right. I can imagine the gameplay style of this working pretty well in a Transformer theme. Imagine, if you will, you are some random mini-bot. It could be any mini-bot, really. Really, it could be anyone, just anyone who seems like they would be at something of a disadvantage if they were being, you know, chased by some giant horrific creature. And you spend the game wandering through, you know, solving puzzles with whatever special ability your minicon happens to have. Could be, you know, Wind Charger's magnetism. Could be Wind Charger's magnetism. Could be Bumblebee's size, being able to squeak through little places. You know, it could be Brawn's strength. It could be anything. I'm describing a situation that any mini-bot could fit into, really. I'm not, like, using pipes for any specific reason, but let's just say, instead of the big blue monster, instead of the one who looks like Grover on crack, what if it was, I don't know, you're running away from some giant, super threatening Decepticon who could squash you in a heartbeat? Just suppose, right? Just suppose it was that. And you could have it, like, you could outwit the Decepticon. That could be how the levels end, is that you outwit the Decepticon, lure him into a trap, drop him down a hole, something. And that would be your way of survival. That way, every stage of this game, you could face a completely different, gigantic, imposing Decepticon. Okay, final level Megatron. Okay, sure, but this would be such a fun way of including just random characters. Overlord, yes, we could do Overlord. You could throw in Magmatron if you want to make all of his beast heads and organic parts a little bit more horrifying to look at. We could throw in Deathsaurus in either mode, now that I think about it. Yeah, this could be fun. Oh, you know who would be terrifying to run away from? You know who would be absolutely terrifying to run away from in a game like this? Tarn. Tarn or any of the DJD, really, if we're being completely honest here. But no, you'd have a great cast of, like, really menacing Decepticons that, you know, you'd want to escape and run away from as fast as possible. This seems like it would be a great way to spend a Halloween night. Great way to spend a Halloween. What other horror game franchises? We could go to the biggest one, which would be Resident Evil. Though these days, I would be hard-pressed to call it a horror franchise. Granted, okay. Okay, so the last couple did get it back to where it was. Like, I still remember Resident Evil 6 and thinking to myself, this just feels like a Michael Bay movie where I get to interact with it. It doesn't feel like a horror game. It just feels like some bloated, explosion-filled blockbuster. You know, and granted, I've never been the biggest Resident Evil fan. My favorite is number 4, which admittedly was kind of half action, half traditional survival horror. I wasn't a big fan of 2 and 3. Let's put it that way. No, a little bit too much pressure, a little bit too little to work with. I mean, I get the idea, but still, not my kind of gameplay. But to Transformers, it's a pretty easy adaptation, I would think. You're mostly dealing with Prime-style Terrorcons at that point. It's not a T-virus, it's Dark Energon, you know? And, you know, you're not dealing with Wesker. You're dealing with a crazy Megatron who wants to rule over an army of zombies. Now, granted, that has merit to it. That would work. But this really does fall into the vein of it just becomes an action game. When you're dealing with Transformers, you have to very specifically pick a character who you would not want, who wouldn't be able to just shoot down hordes of these things. You know, during this same exact scene in Transformers Prime, Optimus and Ratchet deal tons of damage to these things. They have no trouble wiping out an entire horde by themselves. So they are not under any kind of survival threat when it comes to these guys. So you have to manufacture it. Basically, I would be asking them to make what is essentially an action game for Transformers, but you wouldn't be able to use any primary characters. You would have to play like a classic style Bumblebee, where, you know, he's not really known as a combatant. He might have a little handgun that's got limited ammunition, but he doesn't have special powers. He doesn't have like built-in weaponry. He's just Bumblebee, and he has to survive against the hordes. And that, okay, when I put it that way, that has some merit to it. But you wouldn't be able to do Optimus. Optimus has too much firepower behind him. He would be able to survive these situations. It's a tricky one. It's a tricky one because you would really have to figure out some way of making that survival element happen when your character really shouldn't have to struggle the way, you know, Leon Kennedy does. So it's a tricky one, but doable. Doable. I would say probably the most obvious one to do amongst any of these. Of course, Terracons are not the biggest thing in Transformers, so maybe a little bit of lost interest there. I mentioned the asymmetrical survival game, the multiplayer horror games. That brings us to Dead by Daylight. So this is, again, one where I do think Transformers would be a really good fit. Again, you would have to be leaving out Optimus, Megatron, and all that. Now, you could supplement this. So the instinct is to say you're playing as Autobots. So you'd most likely be playing as Minibot characters. You know, or even like not even Minibot characters, but like mid-range Autobots and Autobots. You know, your Prowls, your Jazz. You know, like none of the big guys, none of the big heavy hitters like Optimus Prime. But you would be facing down the likes of Megatron, Tarn, you know, etc. But there's another twist to this where you could also make it Decepticon playable, and you have to mess with the likes of like Runabout and Runabuck, Rumble and Frenzy, you know, small time stuff, and that's when you have to deal with Optimus Prime, Jetfire, you know, big Autobots. It's a doable scenario. It's a doable scenario. It's a shame that this kind of game is only something that we've had here in the last few years, because we would have had opportunities in Transformers for this kind of format to really, really work and really be interesting. The first one would have been during Armada. And I know this isn't Armada, but I needed a team of 4 Minicons with a big Transformer looming over them. So this is my best visual example. But you could have gone away with it during Armada, where you're playing as 4 Minicons trying to outrun a Decepticon trying to capture you. That would have worked out brilliantly. That's completely in the theme of Armada, as well as in theme of the characters. The other time it would have worked was during Animated. Now, nothing about Animated's aesthetic really lends itself to, you know, inspiring a horror game. I mostly mention it because Animated was a rare situation where Decepticons were depicted as much larger and much more powerful than Autobots. So to do the asymmetrical survival thing against them would actually work out. And then you could get away with Optimus, because Optimus was not like the super powerful hero that he is in most media. You know, it would have been Optimus, Ratchet, Bumblebee, and Prowl. You leave out Big Bulkhead because he's just a little bit too big to balance out. And then, yeah, you survive against Starscream, you survive against Blitzwing, you survive against Lugnut or Megatron. It would have worked out because it does balance correctly in theme. But again, nothing about Animated really lends itself to a horror game, does it? And that's going to lead me to the one that I think would work the best, the one that I think you get away with just about playing as any Autobot. Just put in a really bad situation, and probably the most effective horror game I have seen in modern times, and that is Alien Isolation. So we could do this with Transformers with very specific choices. So for starters, yeah, you're fleeing Decepticons, and again, this is where the DJD really comes in handy. Boss especially does kind of give me the vibes of a Xenomorph. So this would be fun. This would work out. And again, there's plenty of Decepticons we pick from. We don't have to make it Voss. I mostly pick Voss because he's super creepy, lanky, quiet. He very much kind of fits the same vibe as the Xenomorph in that game. But you could make it just about any Decepticon. But I want to push this further. Let's not, instead of just like ripping off Alien Isolation, let's figure out what more we could do to work some actual Transformer elements into this. The first thing that came to mind is, what if parts of the environment could transform an attack? What if you could do something like this? Like, you know, where, you know, like a piece of equipment, a storage crate that you would normally just open up for some kind of bonus points, energy, upgrade, parts, whatever, except it transforms and attacks you. You know, it's like having mimics, you know, in very strategically placed locations. You know, and you make it a point to make him like indistinguishable from the environment, at least most of the time. You know what's be really freaky about this? Roguelike. So you could game over because that loot box, once you went to open it, transformed into a little ejector and tried to eat your face. Or, and I like this one better, you get to that same exact point where you offlined before, you get to that loot crate, and it just gives you loot. It's just a normal loot crate. But now, like, there's a microscope on the corner that's twitching a little bit that you have to avoid. I would love segments where you could actually see which parts of the environment are off. Where, okay, so if you're going through a Decepticon, if you're an Autobot trying to sneak through and survive a Decepticon stronghold, for instance, and you notice something that, is pulsing like green or yellow instead of purple, like, think War for Cybertron Energon lines, you just kind of see, you just notice, like, huh, it's a different color than all the others. That's a mimic. To avoid it. And in this particular version of this game, I would make segments where you have to avoid all of this encounter. Obviously, in games like this, you try to avoid encounters as much as possible. But I want to add another element to this, and that is silence. If I was pitching this as an actual Transformers game, yes, you're slinking through a Decepticon base, you're trying not to be spotted. There are stealth sections where you have to get around members of the DJD or just creepy Decepticons in general, and you have to make it all the way to the end of the room without making too much noise. But what if this was a constant thing in some areas? What if, you're entering an area that's got like a stronger sensor grid, and you have to be quiet the whole time. You have to avoid, getting caught, getting noticed by boss. You have to avoid any of these objects that look suspicious that might actually jump at you. And if you because if you create too much noise, something wakes up. That's something being Trypticon. The location you are sneaking out of is Trypticon in base mode. And through the entire time, well, not the entire time, but through certain segments of the game, you would be forced to keep as silent as possible, because if you don't, the room starts shaking, roaring starts happening, things start tumbling around, walls start shifting, and all of a sudden the room collapses with you in it. Game over. Just trying to add a little bit more Transformer element to what is already a really horrific horror game. So this is me just like having fun with the horror video game genre and realizing there's some places where Transformers could fit in. I don't know why this fandom, as big as it is, does not have any kind of room for the kind of fan games that, Five Nights at Freddy's inspires, or, there's YouTubers and VTubers out there who have fan games, but Transformers doesn't do fan games very often. But if we're talking Halloween time, and if we're talking horror genre, obviously there are places where it could go. There are places where we could actually have some fun games with this universe. So, that is my pitch. Whoever's got the Transformer video game license right now, you can't even get the current game out. But once you get the current game out, watch this video. Take some lessons for next October. I'm sure something can be done by then. But let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will see you next time.
I'm like, I think you guys got this. I will back away, and I will see you all later.
You've got this handled.
Alaffi's like, really? You're not gonna help me? Like, it's fine now.
It's like these disgusting creatures breathing down my neck, and you're all just like, I believe in you. You got this.
All right, you seem to have this. 5 minutes.